When I started working on a video about Street Fighter 1, I was planning to answer the question of whether it's a good place to start for fighting game beginners. I will come back to that at the end of the video, but first let me tell you about the rabbit hole I ended up falling down. Special move inputs. The original Street Fighter introduced 3 special moves which have become iconic in the genre: the Dragon Punch,
shoryuken,
Fireball,
hadouken,
and Hurricane Kick.
shoryuken.
They require motion inputs which are still used pretty much the same way in most fighting games to this day. For example, for the Fireball, you do a quarter circle forward by pushing your arcade stick or D-pad down, down forward, and then forward. In most fighting games, including latest Street Fighters, you would then press an attack button to get the special move to come out. But even experienced fighting game players, knowing this is the input for a hadouken, struggle with it when they pick up Street Fighter 1 for the first time. Those in the know will tell you it's because of negative edge, meaning that the attack button is recognized by the game not when you press it down, but when you release it. I think this is probably a remnant of the original arcade version of the game, which used pressure-sensitive pads for input. Instead of separate buttons for a light, medium, or hard punch, you would hit the pad, and how hard you hit it would determine what level of punch came out. You can't register the input as soon as the pressure is detected. You have to wait to see how far the pad is squashed down by the hit to know how hard it was. Even though this version of the arcade machine started to be replaced by the familiar 6-button layout within a few months of the game's release, I am totally speculating that this logic remained in the later versions of the game, leading to the negative edge phenomenon players struggle against to this day. Once you've been told that you can basically hold down a punch button, then do the motion input and release the punch button at the same time, it does get much easier to semi-consistently execute special moves. This goes a long way, as they are ridiculously powerful in Street Fighter. 3 fireballs will wipe out an opponent, and the Dragon Punch and Tatsu both can hit multiple times with the potential to take down an opponent completely from full health if every hit connects, which is rare. But despite the boost that this method gave me in the game, I still wasn't seeing success with every attempted input. I wanted to know more. When exactly do you need to release the punch button? After you've finished the quarter circle motion? During it? Just as it finishes? And for that matter, how much time do you actually have to perform the input? I searched for answers online, but didn't find much. Rubbish made a great video about fireball inputs in different games that you should definitely watch after this one.
The 4-second fireball input is real, and it hates us.
But even Rubbish's spreadsheet of time windows for fireball inputs had a gaping hole at Street Fighter 1. I decided to find out for myself. But how? I ended up turning to a tool designed for speedrunning called Taz Studio, built into the BizHawk emulator. It lets you specify the inputs to a game frame by frame, and it's easy to see the result of some inputs, tweak the inputs, and see what changes. I quickly found that you need to release the punch input before you release the forward direction. Even releasing them at the same time will not work. My first try involved inputting down for 1 frame, down forward for 1 frame, forward and punch for 1 frame, then forward on its own, having released punch for a final frame. This 4-frame input worked and takes around 1/15 of a second given that the game runs at 60 frames per second. Lengthening the inputs, I found that the longest input that worked came out around 20 frames, or a third of a second. Referring again to Rubbish's list, this puts Street Fighter among the tighter end of required fireball timing, but not in a way that would make it exceptionally difficult if the input worked the same way as it does in almost every other fighting game. Case closed then. Just release the punch button before you let go of the forward button, get the whole thing done in less than a third of a second, and you've got a fireball, right? Wrong. To my shock and confusion, some inputs within those parameters did not produce a fireball, but merely a weak punch. Suppose we hold down for 4 frames, then down forward for another 4 frames, then forward for 5 frames, pressing and releasing punch on the 4th forward frame. This is 13 frames total, and we have released punch a frame before we stopped holding forward. But it doesn't work. What? After trying well over 300 combinations of input timing and tracking them in a spreadsheet, I found a formula that seems to work but doesn't make any sense. There are two ways to get the fireball to come out. The first is to release the punch button within 3 frames of holding forward, and to make sure the whole input is less than 20 frames. So doing the whole input as quickly as you can, specifically trying to release the punch button as soon as possible after you start pressing forward, should work. But if you don't manage to release punch within 3 frames of holding forward, things get more complicated. In this case, you must get through down and down forward in 7 frames or less, and then hold forward for at least 12 frames, releasing punch before you release forward. So you need to rush through most of the input, but don't rush to release the forward direction. This sounds complicated, and it is. I am putting a blog post explaining it in more detail, including the assumptions I have made with this method, as well as a link to my input spreadsheet and a Taz Studio file on my Ko-fi page. The post is public, so no donation is required to access it, but of course any support is much appreciated. The link is in the description below. Ultimately, this weirdly complicated input timing requirement makes it hard to develop an intuition for when you're doing the input correctly. If you can release the punch fast enough, you've got a decent amount of leeway for the down and down forward inputs. But if you're a little bit slow on releasing punch, you need to be very fast on the motion. But then releasing forward too quickly will cause it to fail. Doing the whole thing in, for example, 13 frames will work for some combination of frame counts and not for others, which can leave it feeling pretty random. With enough practice, you can develop the muscle memory to reliably execute the move, but it feels like the developers almost went out of their way to make this as unintuitive as possible.
Listeners, don't forget the many gods all over the world.
Returning to my original intention for this video, is Street Fighter good for beginners, as I had naively assumed when I was starting out in the genre? Not really. Even when you do get your head around the execution challenge, it works differently to nearly every subsequent fighting game, so it won't help you much when you move on to explore the wider genre. It is fun in its own way, it's satisfying when you finally beat Sagat, and I'm sure there's potential for lots of janky fun with the completely unbalanced systems when playing with friends. But for most players, I think you will have more fun and less frustration playing almost any other fighting game. It's an important part of fighting game history, but while the core of the genre congealed in the early 90s so that even 30-year-old fighting games can feel surprisingly modern today, Street Fighter 1 is a relic from even before that time. That said, it was pretty popular back in the day, successful enough to launch a franchise which is still going strong now. It must have been the first fighting game played by a lot of people who encountered it in arcades in the late 80s. Fighting game legends like Ryan Hart have talked about playing it back in the day, and it clearly didn't do him any harm. There is also a small but thriving community around the game, and particularly a ROM hack of it called SF1++, which lets you play as any character in the game, not just Ryu or Ken. So if you've got a copy of the game, maybe as part of the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary collection, and you try it and something clicks with you, check out that community. I will put a link to their Discord server in the description. If you want me to make more videos about Street Fighter 1, maybe looking at SF1++ or other community made versions, let me know in the comments.